Okay, welcome everyone to the Poetry Box Live. I'm Shawn Aveningo Sanders, and I'll be your host for tonight's show. For those of you who are not familiar with us, my husband Robert and I run a small press here in Portland, Oregon, known as the Poetry Box. And we publish an international journal called The Poeming Pigeon, and we also specialize in publishing full-length collections and chapbooks. And since 2015, we have published 10 themed issues of the Poeming Pigeon, 22 full-length poetry books, and 44 chapbooks. So you might say we really, really love poetry. And we love working with all of our poets from all walks of life. As frustrating as the Zoom interface may be sometimes, I'm really grateful that we have it, because the Poetry Box Live is our way of supporting all of our talented poets and help them promote their new books, as we don't have live readings going on right now during the pandemic. So I'm really grateful that we have this platform. So let's go ahead and get started with our first reader. Doug Stone is a fourth-generation Oregonian and lives with his wife amid hop yards and vineyards near the Willamette River in Benton County, Oregon. In past life, he has worked on a county road crew, been a grocery store clerk, a caseworker, and an analyst and consultant on public policy issues to state governments, AARP, and the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. He has won the Oregon Poetry Association's Poet Choice Award. His poems have been published in numerous journals and in the anthology A Ritual to Read Together, Poems in Conversation with William Stafford. He has authored two other collections of poetry, The Season of Distress and Clarity and The Moon Still Shimmering on the Water. This is his most recent book that we published this summer. And please welcome Doug Stone.
Thank you, Shawn. And thank you all for sharing part of your Saturday afternoon with us. What I want to read from is my new book, Sitting in Powell's, Watching Burnside Dissolve in Rain. This is the book. I think it's an apropos book for this evening, at least where I'm living. I'll start with the title poem. Sitting in Powell's, watching Burnside dissolve in rain. Eliot got it wrong. April isn't the cruelest month. It's January, and I'm sitting in Powell's watching Burnside dissolve in rain. This is a time of year when it's hard to live in Portland. Even its bright, sharp weirdness has faded away in this incessant rain until nothing's left but a dull gray city. As the afternoon begins to droop like winter-weary eyes, headlights and taillights ignite the traffic spray and Burnside glows like a dying ember. Sidewalks fill with locals hunched under umbrellas, pushing like patient salmon against the constant downpour. I want to go to Phoenix. That poem, maybe it's somebody who just moved here during our Goldilocks summer and then is paying the price when reality sets in the wintertime. But we all have to really make our peace with the weather and with rain. And this is a poem that the voice is somebody who's made that peace. Letter from Oregon. When I first arrived, I was told I would feel a sadness in the rain-soaked winter light, as if something was lost and might never be found again. Then I learned to listen to the rain and walk without the burden of my shadow. Here the rain tells the truth about everything it touches. The hard city truth of glistening concrete, glass, and steel. The soft, lush truth of those things green and living. The quiet truth of a landscape always under low-slung clouds flourishing in the song of winter rain. On those rare days when the winter sun ignites the sky, it tries to tell me the weight of my shadow is a gift. But I no longer trust the promise of bright, cold light. Rain will be gray. That is the nature of rain. But it will never be indifferent, and it will never lie. That, too, is the nature of rain. It's interesting, though, when people move to Oregon, Sometimes where you come from never really leaves you, and that's often the case. But sometimes people don't make their peace with Oregon. And actually, I think my grandmother on my dad's side, that was her case, I think. Wonderful lady. The power of place in memory of my grandmother. Here on the Oregon coast, rain squalls have been shouldering off the ocean all afternoon. Between squalls, the January sun troubles down the left margin of the sky like a misspelled word, neither warm nor bright, just wrong. The ocean looks like a vast sheet of crumpled steel. My grandmother never liked the ocean. It couldn't be trusted. It moved like a surly, shifty thug. She came from the Midwest, where the land was firm and honest all the way to the horizon. Another squall blows over me, and I remember how she never cared for our long gray season of rain. If I really wanted to see her glow, I'd ask her about Iowa winters. Thick, deep snow, she'd say, so white it burned your eyes. The glass-sharp sky so blue you could hear it crack. She'd close her eyes and still hear the laughter of long-dead loved ones ringing in the frozen air. My grandmother lived here almost 70 years and died at 92, her memory racked with dementia so bad she often didn't know where she was. But sometimes she'd close her eyes and through the murky gray of her dementia, she'd see that young school teacher she was before she came west. And she would recite the names of Iowa's 99 counties in alphabetical order. Requiem for Celilo Falls. When I was a kid, we used to stop on our way to my granddad's place in Eastern Washington. As we walked toward the sound of the falls, I heard the air shatter, felt the ground quiver. It was the ancient voices of all those rivers that make up the Columbia thrashed to a single angry roar by the clenched fists of the rocks, then tossed over the falls in a swirling froth of white water and mist, full of leaping salmon. The roar of the falls is caged in my memory. I can still hear that anger these many years after the dams lobotomized those ancient voices into the placid silence of the Columbia that can't remember how to be a river anymore. I know if you're ever driving I-84 about 8 miles east of the Dalles, there'll be a sign on the highway saying Celilo Falls, and if you look over to the river, there's no falls, of course. I was only 10 when they actually finished the Dalles Dam and closed the last spillway, and in 4 hours, they totally flooded the falls. Let's go to Eastern Oregon. An old barn near Fort Rock. The high desert wanders off in all directions, as if lost in its own emptiness. An old barn pummeled by 100 years of weather slouches in the sagebrush like a fighter trying to cover up, waiting for someone to stop the fight. The hot afternoon wind leans hard against the barn's last good side, body punching with gusts until I can hear its bones crack and pop. Punch-drunk, wobbly-kneed, quivering like it has for decades, the old barn still stands, not out of tenacity or the will to survive. It stands because it can't remember how to fall. I want to read a couple of road poems, Oregon road poems. The first one is the Wilson River Road, and if you remember William Stafford's probably most well-loved poem, Traveling Through the Dark, he finds himself on the Wilson River Road. Interesting enough, he finds himself on a road that he would later describe himself as, in scenery, I like flat country. In life, I don't like much to happen. And he found himself on not flat ground and a lot that was going on. The Wilson River Road, thinking of William Stafford. The Wilson River Road can be a nasty stretch of asphalt, especially at night, shouldering through the mountains like a mean drunk staggering toward the coast. But this road is also a poem reciting its way along the river, its sharp swerves and curves, poetry of pavement reading the mountain dark. It is a road of shadows, the river's voice, and south wind dancing in the trees. A road like life, so many turns, so many decisions, so many places where it can all go wrong. And midway through your journey, you may wonder if the trip was really worth it. But as your headlights search for that final curve near the end of the road, you feel the ocean breathe new life into your soul. You're no longer just traveling through the dark. Now you know you've been on the right road all along. Now I'd like to go to a road that's probably the polar opposite of the Wilson River Road. Let's go into Eastern Oregon again. This would be a road that William Stafford would like a lot. Somewhere between Bend and Boise. I'm lost in tire song on this two-lane blacktop, my windshield splattered with stars. High beams hollow out the dark as I power down this unfamiliar road. But on this endless empty highway, there is no danger except to die alone in wreckage of my own making. Here in the middle of nowhere, I don't need or want a map. I'm in this perfect sweet spot where my future is just the road beyond my high beams, my past, an empty rearview mirror. Boy, I can't wait to put 2020 in my rearview mirror. This poem's for any of you who are big sisters, or any of you that have a big sister. I'm not a big sister, and I don't have a big sister, but I've got a little sister, so maybe this poem's for her. I think she may be listening in Kansas City. Big sister. I see her at the end of our lane, a silhouette against the winter sky, waiting for the school bus. She could be on the moon for all I care. After hearing "hurry up or you'll be late" one too many times, I'm still sitting on the porch in a little heap of big sister resentment when I hear the bus gear down, slowing for our stop. Panic scores through me like an electric shock. The rule is simple. The school bus never waits. Knowing I'll hear "I told you so" forever, I start to run, but fall on the gravel, splayed and bleeding. Homework cartwheeling off in all directions as the bus hisses to a stop. Each window frames a face staring at the flailing catastrophe that is me. The bus rocks and sees impatiently as the doors swing open for my sister. Beyond all misery and despair, the only thing I know to do is scream out her name. She hesitates, the driver frowns. She glances back at me, then slowly shakes her head. The doors slam shut, gears grind angrily, and with a shuddering lurch, the bus is gone. Her eyes are slits as she walks past me towards the inquisition that waits for us. She knows our mother will find more fault with her than me. That's what big sisters are for. As I follow like shabby, unclaimed baggage, bobbing in the wake of her disgust, the only thing that matters is she waited. I'm old enough, I'm probably at the cusp of or the beginning of the baby booming tidal wave. And when the baby boomers started school, there weren't enough school buses, and that really was the rule. The school bus never waits. If you weren't on time, that's the way it was. So anyway. To the barista at Starbucks who told me caramel macchiato isn't the heroine in Two Gentlemen of Verona. Some coffee orders are short stories. Some are long as War and Peace, great sweeping narratives of blends, roasts, flavors, milks, temperatures, with or without whipped foam, cream, shots, double shots, extra shots, more shots in the 1812 overture. First time I heard caramel macchiato, cappuccino, americano, frappuccino, I thought the baristas were talking about characters in Two Gentlemen of Verona. The complexity of it all hits home when I'm behind a woman whose coffee order defines her whole reason for being. She takes a deep breath and begins her litany of demands longer than Luther's 95 Theses, more complicated than the Treaty of Versailles. When she demands milk from Himalayan goats that only graze above 13,000 feet, I think the guy behind me is going to have a stroke. 20 minutes later, she's finally done, and the great engine of the coffee industry leaps to life, processing her order with hisses, gurgles, wheezes, whistles, rattles, bangs. The whole coffee shop seethes like a steel mill. Then she asks for a pen, takes out a checkbook, and with the flair of John Hancock, she writes. The woman looks like she expects applause, but the line that now stretches through the shop and around the block only glares in stunned silence. The weary barista nods at me, and I move to the cash register as if to center stage, clear my throat and recite my little poem. Coffee, please, nothing more. Dark and hot. Let it pour. I'd like to read 3 poems for Oregon artists. 2 are writers and one's a visual artist. Thinking of Ursula K. Le Guin. The word must be heard in silence. There must be darkness to see the stars. Ursula K. Le Guin. Walking in her beloved Steens, she stops to take in the long view at day's end. She watches the last thoughts of light drift across the high desert quiet and set the river gleaming like a ribbon trailing from the hand of a child, running off to the edge of the earth, where stars begin to sing their silent songs for her in the cathedral of the darkening sky. This poem's for a visual artist, Rick Bartow. He's a Native American artist. He lived in Newport. Incredible artist. Things you know but cannot explain. In memory of Rick Bartow, Native American artist, died April 2nd, 2016. The morning of the day Rick left eased comfortably into itself, the way days do on the coast when winter is finally forgotten. The tides had their busy schedules to keep. The gulls squabbled among themselves on the beach or spiraled above the waves, shaping the cool spring wind to their liking. Newport busied itself with its Saturday business. By all accounts, the day he left was ordinary. But Crow knew the day an artist leaves is no ordinary day. That afternoon, in his last dream, Rick gathered all the stories he'd run out of time to tell and asked Crow to give them back to coyote, owl, salmon, back to all the animals who told those stories to him because they trusted the honesty of his art. That evening, Rick walked through his mind one last time and packed those things he wanted to take with him on his next journey, things you know but cannot explain. When Crow asked if he was ready, Rick took the last few breaths his tired heart could give him and left this life for his next. A spirit now of the universe, no less than the trees, the animals, and the stars. Things You Know But Cannot Explain is the title of a retrospective of Rick's art that was touring the United States at the time of his death in 2016. And that retrospective is still touring the United States. In fact, it was this year, I think, early on this year, it was in Los Angeles. If it ever comes back to Oregon and you get a chance to see it, do it. In memory of Peter Sears. Peter Sears was our 7th poet laureate. And my poetry owes a lot to Peter. The generosity of him was incredible. So this is in his memory. In memory of Peter Sears, poet, teacher, friend. I believe that when I hear a poem, I hear the silences between the words. Peter Sears. Auden said the death of the poet was kept from his poems, but he was wrong. When poets die, their poems know and they grieve. For Peter, there came the time when time had run its course, when every breath he tried to take was broken and he had no more distance left in him. His poems knew he was dying. He kept no secrets from his poems. The honesty of his poetry had given them the strength to know the truth. When Peter stepped from this life into his next, his poems understood. He had prepared them well to be poems in a world without the poet. They grieved. Oh, they grieved, but did so only in the silences between the words. Peter's generosity was such, I was taking a workshop from him, and after the workshop, he caught me and he said, you know, you really do need to put a book together. Send me 40 poems and I'll go through them and I'll pick 20 that I think might make the basis of a good book. I'm not going to edit them. I'm just tell you what I think. And he did. And I sent those poems off with a few more, and it was accepted. And that generosity obviously will never be forgotten. I'd like to finish with a poem. This is a poem that in the book falls in a series of poems that's it's like a poetic correspondence between Li Bai and Du Fu, the famous Tang Dynasty poets. This poem actually came out of one of Peter's workshops, and it's a poem he liked a lot. It's the only poem in the workshop, I think, that he actually only found two things, I think, that I definitely had to change. But it's interesting, this poem has taken on a different meaning for me in a way since the pandemic. It kind of represents the desolation that and particularly around poetry, that I've kind of felt. But I think at the ending, I think it has a glimmer of hope. At least I hope it does. Wandering deep into autumn, Li Bai to Du Fu. My mind is fallow as these autumn fields. Every mile is no different than the last. I haven't written anything for weeks. Last night I read my old spring poems again, but they only made me sad, so I left them at the side of the road and walked away. At first light across these empty fields, I saw my poems scattering from the pockets of the wind, and like a swirl of dead leaves, they were gone. This autumn morning, I think of you as I watch wild geese spiral up from the river and gather themselves into such lovely lines. The sky becomes the poem I would write for you, but my words wither in the presence of these birds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doug. That was absolutely gorgeous. Your tribute to Peter Sears. I wasn't lucky enough to have met him, but I've heard so many wonderful things about him and his work. And I gotta say, the Caramel Macchiato poem probably has the best title ever and makes me laugh every single time. So I'm really glad you shared that with us on this rainy Oregon day to make us all laugh. So thank you for that. Our next featured poet is going to be Tiel Aisha Ansari, who is the first place winner of our Poetry Box Chapbook Prize for 2020. That was judged by Amy Miller, who said of her collection, "The day of my first driving lesson is a rare love letter to good parents and the legacy of compassion they leave behind." Tiel is a Sufi warrior poet. She works as a data analyst and professional curmudgeon for the Portland Public School District and is president emerita of the Oregon Poetry Association. She now hosts the Wider Window Poetry Show, promoting the work of poets of color on KBOO Community Radio. Her work has been featured in Fault Lines Poetry, Windfall, KBOO, and an Everyman's Library anthology, among others. Her other collections include Country Well Known as an Old Nightmare Stable and Dervish Lions, forthcoming for Fernwood Press. We're very excited about her winning Chapbook here. The day of my first driving lesson, I'll put the link in the chat room so you can pre-order it. It's coming out in January. So please welcome Tiel, Aisha, Ansari.
Thank you, Shawn. And I'd also like to thank the Poetry Box. These small presses are such a vital resource for poetry, and it's really great to have one here in our own town, even though they obviously publish internationally. I'd also like to thank Amy Miller for judging the contest and looking kindly on my entry. And I want to give a special shout out to Penelope Scambly-Schott, who many of you know, and who really inspired the form behind this chapbook. A little bit of background on this: my father passed away in January of 2018, and my mother a little over a year later. And very shortly after my mother died, I had the opportunity to attend a workshop with Penelope on writing poem series. And I had been struggling to write about all this loss, and I saw that, one poem was never going to do it. So I could write a series of poems about this. So I want to dedicate this reading to my parents in loving memory, James Spurgeon Jackson Jr. and Maria Mae Jackson. I'm going to read the first poem in the book. The poems in this book don't exactly have titles, but each one says what year, more or less, it occurs in. And they're not necessarily in chronological order. However, the first poem in the book does happen to be the earliest one. 1960. The day my parents went to get the wedding license, the registrar told them the law required a blood test. The reason was syphilis, but no one ever said so. My father's friend Ralph was the son of a doctor. He opened his office for them, although it was a Saturday. Ralph was a witness at the wedding, and later he married a girl who wasn't Jewish. His father never spoke to him again. My mother's parents didn't approve of my dad, but they came to the wedding and signed the guest book, their names in Chinese. In the photo, my parents look impossibly young. On the license, my father's side says colored. My mother's side says yellow. And the photo that is referenced in this poem appears as part of the cover image that Shawn just showed you, and also on the first page where this poem appears, there's a reproduction of my parents' marriage license. So you can see for yourself what that poem was talking about. One of the things that's a little unusual about my background is that I spent 10 years in Tanzania growing up, from 1971 to 1981, and my parents taught high school there. And this next poem is about that, although it actually starts before we went there. 1968. The day John and Tommy raised black-gloved fists over Olympic gold and under the stars and stripes, I was 4 years old. Maybe my parents saw the salute. They would have watched the sprint. My dad was track and field in college. In high school, he played hoops. When I was 6, we had a Philadelphia 76ers basketball, red, white, and blue. It was miniature, a toy for kids. We could palm it, pretend to be Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain, or Lou Alcindor, who later changed his name, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, superstar, first Muslim in the NBA. Da coached basketball at every school he worked at in Tanzania, on ragged asphalt, red as dirt, hoops rusted, bent, bare of nets. The boys used whitewash to draw the sidelines, key, free throw line. My father brought his own whistle and stopwatch. My mother mimeographed diagrams of the pitch and plays, carried them on a green vinyl clipboard. My father ran drills: dribble, bounce pass, dribble, chest pass, free throw, free throw, free throw. Pass around the key and shoot, I sat in the dry grass and watched. Pass around the key and shoot. Then choose up teams in scrimmage, zone defense, man-to-man. Boys I thought were men, tall as my father. 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., my father stood at green chalkboards, chalk dust between his fingers, in front of these tall boys folded into children's desks, white cotton shirts and indigo shorts, and taught them biology, physics, the foundations of science. They never won a lot of games. They went on to be doctors, engineers, government ministers, all the heroes a newborn country needs. My father was a coach of champions. Back then, the zone defense was legal in the pros. The three-point shot wasn't a thing yet. The college basketball tournament goes by a lot of different names: March Madness, Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final Four. My parents watched it every year together. I watched it with my mother the last week of her life. She never got to see the end of the tournament. My father had a severe stroke in 2015, which basically began the decline that would end in his death. So this is 2015. The day my father woke and found himself strange, found only haze in his hazel eyes. The sun rose smoke-stained to bitter orange. A storm of wings and beaks darkened the sky, hazing the clarity of his hazel eyes. A mass confusion, mad swirl of birds whose wings and beaks occupied the skies. My hands were empty. I had only words. In mass confusion, mad swirl of birds, there his brain hovered in helpless haze. My hands were empty. I offered words as a thread, perhaps, to lead him out of the maze. My father's brain has hovered in haze since the day he fell under the lightning stroke. What thread could lead him out of this maze? The east wind's kiss tasted of smoke. Since the day of the lightning stroke, the day that the sun rose stained bitter orange, the east wind's kiss has lingered in smoke, foreboding a cruel and lasting change. And my father wakes and finds himself strange. That poem actually resonates a whole lot differently after the events of this summer. Those of you who are living in the Central Valley probably experienced a lot of the smoke and heat. I'm going to read the title poem of the book, although I feel like that's a little bit of a misnomer because the poem itself does not actually have a title, but books have to have titles. 1982. The day of my first driving lesson, my mother said, "Think of the wheel as a clock face, your hands at 10 and 2, which made my destination always high noon, and the choices before me, love, duty, fear. 6 at the wheel's bottom, 6 was behind me, but no one gave me a 6-gun or a 6-point star or a guide to my character. Hero, villain, Quaker bride, or dark-skinned woman of a certain reputation. I learned that it's no good watching the clock. No one will tell you when you're called to be a hero. You have to be ready whenever that noon train rolls in." My mother gave me a whole lot of good advice. This poem's about that. 1969, so I was 5. The day I got the best advice of my life was the day I asked my mother, "Why do some kids believe in Santa?" I knew where gifts came from. Grandparents sent them. Aunts and uncles, family friends, real people. Christmas meant leaving Philadelphia in the dark. Cold dawn over domes with chemical names, looming above the marshes along the New Jersey Turnpike, among strange stinks that woke me in the back seat. Across tidal flats with no sea in sight, Manhattan's skyline floated against a smoggy horizon, gray towers over a tangle of asphalt loops, rows of brownstones, cliffs of New York granite. In the shadow of the George Washington Bridge, which I thought of as an extra grandparent, we ate roast lamb with macaroni and cheese with my father's family in Yonkers. Or after a visit to the Buddhist temple in the Bronx, noodle soup, stewed pork hocks, peanut and pressed tofu salad. I said we shouldn't leave the tree in case the glass birds ate the toy fruit decorations. Grown-ups called me imaginative. We unwrapped presents, thank you hugged the givers, played Pounce and Scrabble, went to bed in guest rooms, or fell asleep in homebound cars, clutching new toys and warm with hugs. I couldn't see what Santa had to do with it. I had to ask. My mother said, some people think lying to children doesn't count as lying. I've actually never trusted a grown-up since then. So after we moved back from Tanzania in 1982, my parents moved out to Hawaii. And this poem is 1982 to 2019. The day my parents moved into their new house in Hawaii was the day Kilauea began to erupt. It was spring. The jacarandas were blooming. All the hills above Kona were draped in violet blossoms. We drove to Volcano National Park and sat in the drizzle watching fire fountains dance in the caldera. Lava flowed off and on for the next 37 years. Hot stone poured over the cliffs, ate its way through lush forests, pushed new black cliffs out into the ocean, burned homes, buried whole towns under new landscapes. My dad retired from teaching and volunteered at the park. The summer after he died, Kilauea's summit shook and collapsed. The visitors center at the park was abandoned. My mother sent boxes of keepsakes to my brother and me. Sulfur steam poured from vents and wrapped the slopes in toxic smoke. People coughed and cursed, rubbed itching eyes, drove for miles to find clean air on windward shores. Flowering trees withered in the acid fog. Kilauea coughed out her last lava flows in November. The eruption was officially over. My mother died in March. Ferns were sprouting from cooled lava. The last jacarandas produced a few pale leaves. The whole national park will have to be rebuilt. I'd like to close with one poem from my forthcoming book, Dervish Lions, which will be out from Fernwood Press sometime in the coming year, probably March or April-ish. And it's titled Bottle Without a Message. The bottle was empty. There was no folded paper or leaf with letters cleverly pricked into it, stuffed inside. There was no label. No drink me tag, no emblem cast into the colorless glass. But the wind across the neck whispered like a breeze in a grove of palms that covers an entire continent. Remember. And using the thick base of the bottle as a lens, I set fire to the wreckage of my lifeboat, and the blaze was visible for miles. And in the morning, the same knot letters spelled out the names of God on a lateen sail standing in to shore. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiel. That was wonderful. And I have to commend you on being able to write such a moving book as a tribute to your parents so soon after they passed. That's pretty remarkable. And the stories are throughout this book are just wonderful, and they have all these, there's phenomenal things that happen because of the location of all the wonderful places you've lived, but then there's all these just wonderful everyday moments when I think about things that I miss about my parents or things that I miss about being with my kids. It's all those little tiny everyday things that seem to matter, and you did a really great job of highlighting so many of those so beautifully. So thank you for that. Our final feature for tonight is Rebecca Smolen. And Rebecca is a writer based here in Portland, Oregon, transplanted from New Hampshire in 2014. She is a mom of 2 adorable little gingers. She has a strong feminist voice that sometimes gets trapped within society's confines, but vows to teach her son and daughter that there are no confines. Smolen has a degree in creative writing and philosophy and works as a veterinarian technician. She is trained and certified in the Gateless method and leads writing workshops. Her first chapbook, Womanhood and Other Scars, was published by the Poetry Box in 2018, one of our first chapbooks. Her poetry and essays can be found most recently in Allegory Ridge, The Inflectionist Review, Hip Mama, The Poeming Pigeon Cosmos, and the anti-fascist anthology Shout. It's my pleasure to welcome Rebecca Smolen.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here and to hear Doug and Tiel read too. I love your poems. Thank you so much for sharing those. And thank you, Shawn, and tell Robert I said hi and thanks too. I am very honored to have this book, Excoriation, published by the Poetry Box. I'm going to read quite a few poems out of the book and also interlace some newer poems too. I wanted to start with a newer poem titled Open. What if closed minds could be opened, like mouths when taking a bite? When bellies grumble, and that empty feeling that tells us we are hungry, we need food. What if our minds could work like that? Restaurants would be libraries with teachers like grandmothers wanting to feed everyone, to welcome in the worn down. Tell them their stories. Create a bond and understanding with all of that knowledge simmering in giant pots or baking in ovens. Doors stay open for air, for that scent to get out, of savory dinners and sweet desserts. What if minds could be opened like mouths when taking a bite? Learning would be every evening gathered around a long farm table, devouring new concepts to capture the sun's energy and how to save ours. There would be no way to live hungry, hateful, or ignorant without wasting away gaunt and shameful. And this next one is from the book. It's titled Picture of Innocence. Strange how tears can crawl thread to thread across my pillowcase, yet vanish when smeared away. Your favorite picture of me, frigid December day, clouded with breath and overcast. We were hunting in the woods for a Christmas tree. I had walked ahead as you called my name. I spun around expectant. You had found a worthy one. My face hopeful with such innocent joy, flushed cheeks and nose so cold they had begun to burn red. My freckles popped against the blue-white backdrop of forest snow, pregnancy unknown at that time. 10 more days until I discovered, another 23 to begin to lose it. The last of my innocence then knew loss, somehow related to the tears that shed now, each drop creating a new, larger ripple from the stone thrown into a lake at dawn, breaking the mirror, reflection imitating life without all the hassle, just the beauty. And since the shutdown and COVID, I've been enjoying so many posts of everyone's animals and how happy they must be. I This is kind of a downer, but I lost my beloved cat last December, and I always think how happy he would be. He was just a big mush, and it was so good. This one is titled Punishment's View, and it references Cassiopeia, which in Greek mythology, she was punished for having quite the ego, and she was punished being put into the stars in a constellation upside down. If I could put anyone into the stars, it would be my old cat. Barney was more dog than cat, more counselor than most, more sedative than the Klonopin. He was cursed with a defective guts that I was sure would be the death of him. But in such irony, his heart grew too large. I might place him near the North Star. Perhaps in another life, he had known ego too well and punished to be in need of a human. Maybe his vanity flooded his kingdom just as his heart and lungs did. Or did a sea monster attack his people, and instead of sacrificing the only one he loved more than himself, I picture him fighting or being clever to stall and await Perseus to kill it. His embarrassment becoming a feline that loved belly rubs, though he seemed to make the best of anything. I can picture him on Cassiopeia's lap, soaking the shame that runs down her face into his fur, allowing her free hand to put down the mirror she clutched so tightly, cradle his girth into her gut, his limbs draped, face peaceful as a palm with a purr, condemned to count his breath within every minute and absorb those elephant heartbeats that calm them both, even when upside down. This next one, and today, if you didn't know, is the new moon, so I wanted to honor that as well. This one mentions my dad, who is on this call and listening. Hi, Dad. This is called Fishing the New Moon. Nat Geo had clickbait on discovering another Earth moon. It lured me in like a trout on a fisherman's line with a perfectly tied midge. I've given my devotion to the moon since I was a child, telling my father to race it home, and it has never left my side. It never leaves Venus for long either. If absent, it gifts me Orion or Cassiopeia, but never more than a night or two. All the other planets have moons named after great gods. We kept Moon for ours, as it was our first. You never forget the first fish you catch, pond-side, precarious on a large rock, furthest over the depths. The bait taken, bobber went under, a little off balance. My dad steadied my arms as I reeled it in on our rusted, borrowed rod. A sunfish, a little larger than my child hand, iridescent orange and struggling. My father removed the hook from the bottom lip gently and quick, placed it back into the water where it paused, maybe stunned, in his hand, then cautiously swam away with bruised pride, I had imagined. I love it most when water is calm, mirror-like, early when nothing breaks the surface, when the reflection of something is just as real, where the pink of the morning still cradles the moon as well as the inky night, where I find my breath held so not to cause ripples either. But if there is a second moon just within a blind spot that I could be worshiping on dark new moon nights, I'd feel a little less trapped in a blind struggle, or perhaps merely in a tender hold of a hand ready to set me free. And this one mentions my mom. Roots of an aspen. Each day is weighed by the size of my son's palm, the way it fits inside mine. It grows with each grasp, he grows, and now my fingers no longer reach all the way around. When could be the last time I get to measure like this? I hold each experience like a warm fist around my lungs, like the pain in the base of my skull, down to a tail that never formed. The only way for aspen to reproduce is for a matured one to die. Its roots will then sprout new saplings. One cares for another and cares for all, as they are all one. My mother, shorter now, sinks into me as if she never really got that love as a daughter. Now we give cyclically. We languish when the other is in need, as if a small hook attaches us at the heart and stomach and strums the hair string in a key only we are able to grieve. Each day we fear this unspoken silence. Let's see. I'm going to read a section of the poem Body as Home. I'm going to read the third part of this poem, which is titled Body Lost from Home. Within a night at water's edge, as planets continue to tilt further, a taste of blood from bitten lip, first by me, then him. I taste his wine, thankful that it might mask my copper flavor. My thighs and womb contract, disguises questions he's unaware he hungers to ask. My miscarriage of thoughts lost to lust. A red leaf flutters into wind from birthplace, executes acrobatics through breeze. Hypnotic, such a happy thing before it had to come down, became glued to water's surface. But the sun continues to rotate around microscopic space no one bothered to ask of or knew to look for until now. A quiver of the leaf allows it to soak through, piercing delayed considerations and water's surface. My autumn-scented failures are so common, blend across continents, equivalent through centuries, yet I still search for strength. The shape of the moon's grin deviates from pond to lake, to river, to ocean, to nebula within the universe of his tear. A blood droplet into water resembles smoke, undulates upward prior to descent under its own weight, can only be concealed by silent darkness of night's secrets under the surface. Its ripples pull his shattered wineglass into pinholed sky, while both reflect upward to blur constellations into the underestimated depths, able to end me. Okay, I promise I won't leave you on a sad note. I'll pick you up. Let's do, this one is titled, this one's in the book also. It's titled Nyctophobia, which is fear of the dark. The way the unknowns multiply by tens, darkness still frightens, depending on the level of suffering necessary. The nocturnals that can bite, that scurry around soft, quickened footsteps, or how protection is weighed amongst the weight of the blankets up over shoulder covering earlobes. The truth is known to hide within the same darkness. It peeks out from closets, out from under beds, out from innocent shadows. Threats lace around ankles, compress lungs until breath struggles inward and rushes too quickly out. Minds become untrustworthy as it takes up tango with the long window curtains. Sounds from the fans start to play Mozart tunes, and the little red lights of electronics charging begin to double when peered at directly. Darkness wraps around night sweats, inside terror that stems from insecurities that were not given the attention deserved, multiplied by tens, internalized by fears left in the dark. Thank you. This next one is titled Look Up and Listen. A sound of landing, rain bounces up, off each drop creating more of a shush than singular splash. More static together as a storm than many drips, though when frozen, the snow is more barrier than echo. More of an umbrella for noise, like electricity within a glass ball. The same way the hills, when crested, allows the power of the ocean to greet you with a rush of gust from the waves blooming onto broken shells. The way the bass guitar reaches into your gut to pluck chords that suspend precarious emotions that were neatly packed away, forgotten. In accumulation of inspiring noise, what if we can all be saved? All right, this one is a newer one. I titled it Rewilding. The thought of trees dropping leaves in gift is such sweet sentiment. Most grieve at such an action as losing their leaves, a beautiful sadness. What if it's less about us, though, more about them reaching out? That they feel a magnetism, an unexplained similarity, that connection only poets write about. There are arms branching sunward, the immense pull that grows limbs and fruit. Last resort attempt at a touch that they sense they need. Trees drop leaves like love notes or crumbs on a trail back to home. Would that mean the trails that are years deep in such leaves might hold a secret? If we notice ourselves noticing them, is it a call to us? Should we follow that stranger's invitation that feels familiar? Someone has found the trees can sing, have a heartbeat, reroute sustenance to other trees needing in their community. That they have a community, like roots holding hands. Perhaps they grieve for us and reach out only in attempt to comfort, knowing all that we've spent, all that we risk, that we've lost to be human. And just a couple more. So this next one is titled A Lesson in Letdown. The sun is not the center of our universe as we had believed. This is true. Even it is captive, orbiting around a bit of nothing. The immense beast of the sun is more like us and less like a god. Perhaps it's stuck within the force of all planets orbiting it, one in cahoots with the next, never knowing, never able to conceive the very notion of you needing me, using me, or me using you, then needing you. A disappointment to have such a consistency we've somehow relied on all of our lives be false. not our center of the universe. This experience is familiar, a type of failure, disappointment, a lasting distaste of how I was wrong, a lesson in letdown. What could measure up to the belief that a thing might ever have autonomy? We are the large entity in our own lives. We are center beast that all other perceptions gravitate around. Could we control what is drawn in toward us? Can we avoid sun flares within us or stray the damaging meteors? Should we merely brace for impact, organize the chaos in the wake? Within me, there's an uproar when I see newly mapped galaxies, another universe akin to nerves in a body, veins that transport most of the notion of life through us. The sense of paralleled order creates a paralyzing perception of disorder. How can it all be the same? How can we be any small bit similar as this universe? What does it imply could live within us all? What is this that we are a part of? The gravity of one captivating another, the gravity of you above me, the gravity of me letting it all go. And then this last one is very short. It's very tender, and it is one of my recent works. This is titled Promise to Remind Me. If I happen to lose track of you someday, and if we happen to cross paths again in old age when our memories have grayed, our elbows no longer bend to embrace each other, and our knees cannot carry us past the flowers I had made you pause for. May you remind me of the forgotten poetry you had been. Ignite the flames I could once wander through, and this life I would spend for mere promise of one more night, forehead against forehead with you. Thank you so much for listening.
Oh, Rebecca, that was stunning.
Oh,
Thank you so much for sharing your beautiful work with us.
Thank
Your
you.
poems have such a visceral quality to them, and I've always just loved that. And I have to say, your poem about the trees, oh wow! I love the concept of dropping leaves as gifts or as love notes. That was really fun. Thank you for sharing that. So that's it. That's our 3 fantastic poets tonight. Hooray, you guys were all fantastic. Thank you, Tiel. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Rebecca. And thank all of you for joining us for our 3rd edition of the Poetry Box Live. We do send this out in our newsletter, but in case you miss it, it is always the 2nd Saturday of the month at 4 p.m. Pacific time. And we post everything on our website on the events page, so you can always look there. And we usually try to put the events on Instagram and Facebook as well. And I invite all of you to go to our website, thepoetrybox.com, and sign up for our newsletter to keep up on submission opportunities and events. There's a little thing at the bottom of every page where you can click on to sign up for our newsletter. So thanks again for joining us today. Take care and be safe wherever you are. And we will see you next month on December 12th.